Sometimes the most profound lessons come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. In a world where we judge books by their covers and make assumptions in the blink of an eye, one woman's journey through pain, service, and ultimate vindication would shake the very foundation of what it means to truly see someone. What happens when a decorated military hero becomes the target of cruel judgment, only to have those same accusers discover a truth so powerful it changes everything they thought they knew about courage, sacrifice, and the real meaning of honor? This is the story of a woman who served her country with distinction, faced unimaginable challenges, and found herself standing at the center of a moment that would redefine respect itself. Prepare yourself for a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about assumptions, redemption, and the extraordinary power of truth to transform hearts and minds. In the most, the fluorescent lights of the Veterans Affairs Hospital cast harsh shadows across the waiting room as Sarah Martinez adjusted her position in the uncomfortable plastic chair. The dull ache in her left leg had evolved into something sharper over the past hour, but she refused to let it show on her face. Her military uniform, though pressed and proper, couldn't quite hide the slight tremor in her hands, or the way she favored her right side when she moved. At 28, Sarah carried herself with the disciplined posture that 4 years in the Navy had drilled into her very bones. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and despite the pain medications that sometimes made her feel disconnected from her own body, her eyes remained alert and aware. She had learned early in her recovery that showing weakness, even here among fellow veterans, often invited unwanted questions and uncomfortable conversations. The waiting room was fuller than usual that Tuesday morning. Several older veterans sat scattered across the space, some reading newspapers, others staring blankly at the muted television screen mounted in the corner. Sarah noticed how they glanced at her occasionally, their eyes lingering on her uniform, before quickly looking away. She had grown accustomed to these looks over the past 6 months since her medical discharge, though they still stung in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Dr. Rebecca Chen emerged from the corridor of examination rooms, her clipboard in hand and a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sarah had been seeing Dr. Chen for 3 months now, ever since her previous physician had transferred to another facility. Their relationship was cordial but distant, marked by efficient medical consultations that rarely ventured beyond the clinical details of Sarah's condition. "Martinez," Dr. Chen called out, her voice carrying across the waiting room with practiced authority. Sarah rose carefully from her chair, fighting back the grimace that wanted to cross her face as weight shifted to her injured leg. She had learned to mask these moments of vulnerability, understanding that in the military culture that still surrounded much of her life, showing pain was often interpreted as weakness rather than the natural consequence of service and sacrifice. As she walked toward Dr. Chen, Sarah became aware of the conversations that seemed to pause around her. She couldn't make out the specific words, but the tone was familiar. It was the sound of judgment being passed, of conclusions being drawn based on incomplete information and surface-level observations. She had heard it before, in grocery stores and restaurants, at family gatherings and community events. The questions were always the same, even when they weren't spoken aloud. What kind of injury could she really have? She looks fine. Why is she wearing that uniform if she's not actively serving? The examination room was small and sterile, decorated only with standard medical charts and a single window that looked out onto the hospital parking lot. Sarah settled onto the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath her as Dr. Chen reviewed her chart with the methodical attention of someone who had conducted thousands of similar appointments. "How have you been managing the pain this week?" Dr. Chen asked, her pen poised above the chart as she prepared to document Sarah's response. Sarah considered the question carefully. The truth was that some days were better than others, that the pain sometimes felt like a living thing that moved through her body in unpredictable patterns. Some mornings she woke feeling almost normal, while other days the simple act of getting dressed required a level of determination that exhausted her before the day had truly begun. But she had learned that medical professionals often interpreted honest descriptions of pain as requests for increased medication, and Sarah was determined to avoid that particular trap. "It's manageable," she replied, the same answer she had given for weeks. "Some days are harder than others, but I'm working through it." Dr. Chen nodded and made a note in the chart. Sarah wondered what she was writing, whether her words were being translated into medical terminology that might not capture the full complexity of her experience. The gap between what she felt and what could be adequately described in clinical terms seemed to grow wider with each appointment. "Any changes in mobility? Are you still doing the physical therapy exercises we discussed?" Sarah confirmed that she was following the prescribed routine, though she didn't mention how some of the exercises left her feeling defeated and frustrated. The physical therapist was kind and encouraging, but Sarah often felt like she was failing to meet expectations that had never been clearly defined. How much improvement was enough? When would she be considered fully recovered? These questions hum over every session like storm clouds. Unaddressed but impossible to ignore. The examination proceeded with routine efficiency. Chen checked reflexes, assessed range of motion, and asked the standard questions about sleep patterns and emotional well-being. Sarah provided the answers she had learned were expected, the responses that would keep the appointment moving forward without complications or extended discussions about topics she preferred not to explore in this setting. As Dr. Chen completed her notes, Sarah found herself staring out the window at the parking lot below. She could see her own car, a modest sedan that she had purchased after her discharge. It represented independence and normalcy, two things that had felt increasingly elusive since her return to civilian life. The car was reliable and practical, chosen more for its safety features than its appearance, though Sarah sometimes missed the sense of purpose and direction that had defined her military service. "I'm going to continue your current medication regimen for another month, doctor," Chen said, looking up from her chart. "The physical therapy seems to be helping, and your progress is within normal ranges for this type of injury. We'll reassess at your next appointment." Sarah nodded and accepted the prescription renewals, though she couldn't shake the feeling that her progress was being measured against standards that didn't quite fit her situation. Every veteran's recovery was different, shaped by factors that couldn't always be captured in medical charts or standardized assessments. But the system required measurable outcomes and clearly defined milestones, leaving little room for the messy reality of individual healing processes. As she left the examination room and walked back through the waiting area, Sarah noticed that several of the other veterans were now engaged in animated conversation. Their voices carried more clearly this time, and she caught fragments of their discussion that made her steps slow involuntarily. "These young ones today," one elderly veteran was saying, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had served in an earlier era. "They get a little scratch and suddenly they're disabled veterans. Back in my day, we didn't have time for all these medical appointments and therapy sessions." Another voice joined in, equally dismissive. "Look at her, walking around in that uniform like she's still active duty. If she was really hurt as bad as she claims, she wouldn't be able to move around like that. Probably trying to work the system for maximum benefits." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. She wanted to turn around and explain, to tell them about the months of rehabilitation, the sleepless nights, the daily struggle to rebuild her life after her injury. She wanted to describe the explosion that had changed everything, the weeks in the hospital, the difficult decision to accept a medical discharge when continuing her naval career had proven impossible. But she also knew that explanations rarely changed minds that were already made up. These men had formed their opinions based on what they could see, and what they could see was a young woman who appeared to be physically intact and mobile. They couldn't see the internal damage, the way certain movements sent waves of pain through her body, or the psychological effort required to maintain the appearance of normalcy in public spaces. Instead of confronting the conversation, Sarah continued toward the exit, her military training helping her maintain composure, even as her emotions churned beneath the surface. She had learned that dignity was often more powerful than argument, that sometimes the best response to ignorance was simply to continue living your life with integrity and purpose.
The automatic doors opened with a soft whoosh, and Sarah stepped out into the crisp morning air. The parking lot was busy with the usual mix of patients, visitors, and medical staff coming and going about their daily business.
For a moment, she stood still and breathed deeply, letting the fresh air clear away the claustrophobic feeling that had been building during her appointment. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her sister Maria, asking about her doctor's visit, and whether she wanted to meet for lunch later in the week. This simple gesture of caring from her family reminded Sarah that not everyone judged her situation through the lens of skepticism and misunderstanding. There were people in her life who understood that recovery was a complex process, that healing didn't always follow predictable timelines or visible patterns. As she walked toward her car, Sarah reflected on the conversation she had overheard in the waiting room. The veterans who had made those comments weren't necessarily bad people, but they were operating from a limited understanding of what military service and injury could look like in the modern era. Their own experiences had shaped their expectations, and anything that didn't fit those familiar patterns was automatically suspect. Sarah reached her car and paused with her hand on the door handle. She could see her reflection in the window. A young woman in uniform who appeared capable and strong. The image was accurate as far as it went, but it didn't tell the complete story. It didn't show the daily medications, the careful planning required for any physical activity, or the ongoing process of redefining her identity outside of active military service. The drive home took her through familiar neighborhoods that had become part of her new normal. She had chosen her apartment specifically for its proximity to the VA hospital and other resources she needed for her ongoing recovery. The area wasn't particularly exciting, but it was practical and affordable, two qualities that had become increasingly important as she learned to navigate life on a disability income. Her apartment building was a modest complex that housed a mix of residents, including several other veterans in various stages of their own transitions to civilian life. Sarah had found comfort in this community, even when their interactions remained largely superficial. There was an unspoken understanding among them, a recognition of shared experiences that didn't require detailed explanation or justification. Sarah parked in her assigned space and gathered her things from the passenger seat. Her uniform jacket was carefully folded, and she made sure her medical paperwork was organized in the folders she kept for such purposes. These small acts of organization helped her maintain a sense of control and purpose, important elements in a life that sometimes felt unmoored from its previous certainties. The elevator in her building was slow and occasionally unreliable, but Sarah preferred it to the stairs when her leg was bothering her. Today had been a relatively good day physically, but she could feel the familiar tightness beginning to build in her muscles, a sign that rest and careful attention to her body's needs would be important over the next few hours. Her apartment was small but efficiently arranged, with everything she needed within easy reach. Sarah had learned to adapt her living space to accommodate her physical limitations without making it feel like a medical facility. The furniture was chosen for comfort and functionality, while personal touches like family photos and mementos from her naval service helped maintain connections to the relationships and experiences that defined her sense of self. As she changed out of her uniform, Sarah thought about the upcoming week and the various appointments and activities that would fill her days. Physical therapy on Wednesday, a support group meeting on Friday, and a job interview the following Tuesday for a position with a local nonprofit organization. Each of these represented a different aspect of her ongoing recovery and reintegration into civilian life. The job interview was particularly important to Sarah, as it represented the possibility of returning to meaningful work that aligned with her values and skills. The position involved coordinating services for other veterans, work that would allow her to use her military experience and personal understanding of the challenges faced by service members transitioning to civilian life. Sarah hung her uniform carefully in the closet, making sure it was properly arranged for her next appointment. The ritual of caring for her uniform had become a form of meditation, a way of maintaining her connection to her military identity even as she adapted to new circumstances. The uniform represented more than just clothing. It was a symbol of service, sacrifice, and belonging to something larger than herself. Her phone rang as she was settling into her favorite chair with a cup of tea. The caller ID showed her mother's number, and Sarah smiled as she answered. Her family had been incredibly supportive throughout her recovery, though she sometimes struggled with their desire to help in ways that made her feel diminished or dependent. "How did your appointment go today?" her mother asked, concern evident in her voice. Sarah provided a brief update on her medical status, focusing on the positive aspects while downplaying the challenges she continued to face. She had learned that her family worried enough without hearing every detail of her daily struggles, and she preferred to handle most difficulties independently when possible. "Are you eating enough?" "You sounded tired the last time we talked." Her mother continued, the maternal instinct to nurture and protect clearly activated. Sarah assured her that she was taking care of herself, though she appreciated the concern. The conversation continued for several more minutes, covering family news, upcoming events, and plans for a visit in the coming month. These regular check-ins with her family provided an important anchor in Sarah's life, reminding her that her worth and identity extended far beyond her military service or her current medical situation. After ending the call, Sarah settled back into her chair and reflected on the events of the morning. The comments she had overheard at the hospital were still bothering her, not because they were particularly surprising, but because they represented a broader misunderstanding about what military service and sacrifice could look like in the 21st century. Sarah's injury had occurred during her deployment aboard a naval vessel, when an equipment malfunction had resulted in an explosion that left her with significant internal injuries and ongoing complications. The physical damage had healed as much as it was going to, but the impact on her body's systems continued to affect her daily life in ways that weren't always visible to outside observers. The decision to accept a medical discharge had been one of the most difficult of her life. Sarah had joined the Navy with plans for a 20-year career, motivated by a desire to serve her country and be part of something meaningful and important. Giving up those dreams before they had been fully realized felt like a profound loss, one that she was still learning to process and accept. But Sarah had also discovered that her service didn't end with her discharge from active duty. Her experience and perspective as a veteran gave her unique insights into the challenges faced by others going through similar transitions. The upcoming job interview represented an opportunity to continue serving, just in a different capacity and with a different focus. As evening approached, Sarah prepared a simple dinner and settled in to read a book that had been recommended by her therapist. The story followed a group of characters facing various challenges and setbacks, learning to find meaning and purpose in circumstances that hadn't been part of their original plans. The themes resonated with Sarah's own experience, offering both comfort and inspiration as she continued to write the next chapter of her own story. The day had been typical in many ways, marked by routine medical appointments and the ongoing process of building a new life outside of active military service. But the comments at the hospital had reminded Sarah that her journey was taking place within a larger context of misunderstanding and judgment, forces that she couldn't control but could choose how to respond to. As she prepared for bed, Sarah felt grateful for the progress she had made and optimistic about the opportunities that lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and possibilities, and she was determined to meet them with the same courage and determination that had carried her through her military service and the difficult months of recovery that had followed. The uniform hanging in her closet represented her past, but it also symbolized the values and principles that would continue to guide her future. Service, integrity, courage, and commitment weren't limited to active military duty. They were qualities that could be applied to any meaningful endeavor. Sarah was ready to discover what form her continued service would take, confident that her experiences had prepared her for whatever lay ahead. Unexpected ways. The community center on Maple Street had seen better days, but it remained a vital hub for local activities and gatherings. On Thursday afternoon, the main hall was filled with folding chairs arranged in neat rows facing a small stage where a podium stood ready for the evening's event. Sarah arrived early, wanting to secure a seat where she could easily manage her physical limitations without drawing attention to herself. The occasion was a town hall meeting focused on veteran services and community support initiatives. Local officials, veterans organization representatives, and concerned citizens had been invited to discuss ways to better serve the area's growing population of military veterans. Sarah had decided to attend after seeing a flyer at the VA hospital, hoping to learn about resources and opportunities that might benefit her and others in similar situations. As people began to filter into the hall, Sarah noticed the familiar dynamics of community gatherings. Groups formed naturally based on age, affiliation, and shared interests. Older veterans clustered near the front, their conversation animated with the camaraderie of shared service. Younger attendees, many of whom appeared to be family members or community volunteers, scattered throughout the middle sections. Local officials and organizers moved between groups, shaking hands and engaging in the kind of preliminary networking that preceded formal presentations. Sarah chose a seat in the middle section, close enough to hear clearly but positioned where she could leave quickly if her pain levels became unmanageable. She had learned to plan for contingencies, always aware of exit strategies and backup plans that might become necessary without warning. This careful preparation had become second nature, a form of self-preservation that allowed her to participate in activities that might otherwise be too risky or uncomfortable. Mayor Patricia Williams took the stage promptly at 7 o'clock, her professional demeanor commanding immediate attention from the assembled crowd. She was a woman in her early 50s, known for her pragmatic approach to local governance and her ability to build consensus around difficult issues. Her opening remarks focused on the community's commitment to supporting veterans and the importance of understanding their diverse needs and experiences. Veterans are not a monolithic group, Mayor Williams explained, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. They represent different generations, different branches of service, and different types of experiences. Our challenge is to develop programs and services that acknowledge this diversity while ensuring that no one falls through the cracks. The first speaker after the mayor was Colonel James Patterson, a retired Army officer who had served in both Iraq and Afghanistan before settling in the community 5 years earlier. His presentation focused on employment challenges facing veterans, particularly the difficulty of translating military skills and experience into civilian job qualifications. He spoke passionately about the need for better education and outreach among local employers, many of whom remained unfamiliar with the value that veterans could bring to their organizations. Colonel Patterson's remarks resonated with Sarah's own experiences. She had encountered the translation challenge repeatedly during her job search, finding that potential employers often struggled to understand how her naval training and experience related to civilian work requirements. Even when the connections seemed obvious to her, she had learned that explaining them required patience and skill, particularly when dealing with hiring managers who had no personal military experience. The next speaker was Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a psychologist who specialized in treating veterans with PTSD and other service-related mental health conditions. His presentation was more technical, focusing on the complex relationship between physical injuries and psychological trauma. He emphasized that recovery was rarely linear, and that successful treatment required addressing both the visible and invisible wounds that veterans might carry. Dr. Rodriguez's comments about invisible injuries struck particularly close to home for Sarah. While her physical injuries were real and ongoing, she had also struggled with aspects of psychological adjustment that were harder to define and address. The loss of military identity, the challenge of finding new purpose and direction, and the ongoing stress of navigating systems that weren't always designed with veterans' needs in mind had all taken their toll in ways that couldn't be measured through standard medical examinations. As Dr. Rodriguez concluded his remarks and opened the floor for questions, Sarah noticed movement in the back of the hall. A group of younger men had entered quietly, their bearing and appearance suggesting recent military service. They remained standing near the back wall, their body language suggesting both interest and wariness about the proceedings. The first question came from an elderly woman in the front row who identified herself as the mother of a veteran. She spoke emotionally about her son's struggles with addiction and homelessness, describing her frustration with systems that seemed designed to help but often created more obstacles than solutions. Her voice broke as she described watching her child, who had once been strong and capable, struggle with challenges that seemed insurmountable. Mayor Williams responded with compassion and specific information about local resources, but Sarah could see that the woman's pain ran deeper than what could be addressed through policy discussions or service referrals. The gap between official responses and personal experiences was evident, highlighting the limitations of community meetings in addressing the full scope of veteran-related challenges. The questions continued for nearly an hour, covering topics ranging from housing assistance to educational benefits to healthcare access. Each question revealed different facets of the veteran experience, painting a complex picture of a community struggling to understand and support a diverse population with varying needs and circumstances. As the formal presentation concluded and people began to mill around for informal conversations, Sarah noticed that several attendees were looking in her direction. She couldn't determine whether their attention was friendly curiosity or something more judgmental, but the feeling of being observed made her uncomfortable in a way that was becoming increasingly familiar. An older veteran approached her as she was gathering her things to leave. He was tall and weathered, with the kind of bearing that suggested extensive military service. His name tag identified him as Frank Morrison, Korean War veteran and local VFW commander. His expression was serious as he looked down at Sarah's uniform, and then met her eyes. "You active duty?" he asked without preamble, his tone suggesting he already suspected the answer. Sarah explained her status as a medically discharged veteran, watching as Morrison's expression shifted subtly. She had learned to recognize this particular change in demeanor, the way people's attitudes altered when they learned she was no longer serving actively. It was as if her uniform suddenly became less legitimate, her right to wear it somehow diminished by her civilian status. "What kind of injury?" Morrison pressed, his question carrying implications that Sarah found both intrusive and offensive. She provided a brief clinical description of her condition, leaving out the emotional and psychological details that she didn't feel obligated to share with a stranger.
Morrison nodded but didn't seem entirely satisfied with her explanation.
Sarah could sense additional questions forming behind his eyes, but she had no intention of subjecting herself to further interrogation. "These young veterans today," Morrison said, his voice loud enough to carry to nearby conversations. "They seem to have a lot more medical problems than we did back in the day. Makes you wonder if standards have gotten too soft, if people are looking for easy ways out instead of toughing it through like real soldiers." The comment stung in ways that Sarah couldn't fully articulate. The implication that her injury was somehow less legitimate, that her medical discharge represented a failure of character rather than a consequence of service, reflected assumptions that she had encountered repeatedly since leaving active duty. The suggestion that modern veterans were somehow weaker or less committed than their predecessors ignored the realities of contemporary military service and the evolving understanding of how service-related injuries affected the human body and mind. Rather than engaging in an argument that was unlikely to change Morrison's perspective, Sarah simply nodded politely and moved toward the exit. She had learned that defending herself against such comments often led to increasingly uncomfortable confrontations that left her feeling drained and frustrated. Sometimes the most dignified response was simply to remove herself from situations where her worth and legitimacy were being questioned by people who lacked the information or empathy to understand her experience. The parking lot was quiet as Sarah walked to her car, the late evening air providing a welcome contrast to the stuffiness of the community center. She had hoped that attending the town hall meeting would provide useful information and perhaps opportunities to connect with other veterans facing similar challenges. Instead, she felt more isolated and misunderstood than when she had arrived. As she drove home, Sarah reflected on the complex dynamics that seemed to surround veteran identity and community acceptance. The speakers at the meeting had talked eloquently about supporting veterans, but the reality she had encountered suggested that support often came with conditions and expectations that didn't always align with individual experiences or needs. The older veterans, like Frank Morrison, had legitimate pride in their service and sacrifice. Their experiences had shaped their understanding of what military service should look like, and deviations from those familiar patterns could seem threatening or incomprehensible. But Sarah also recognized that their perspectives were limited by the historical context of their own service, when different expectations and support systems had created different outcomes for wounded or struggling veterans. Back in her apartment, Sarah changed out of her uniform and settled into her evening routine. The day had been more emotionally exhausting than physically challenging, leaving her with the familiar feeling of being caught between worlds. She was too young and her injuries too invisible for some veterans to take seriously, while being too damaged and complicated for easy reintegration into civilian community life. Her phone showed a missed call from the nonprofit organization where she had interviewed for the coordinator position. Sarah's heart rate increased slightly as she prepared to listen to the voicemail, hoping for positive news but prepared for disappointment. The job market remained challenging for veterans, particularly those whose medical conditions required accommodations that some employers were reluctant to provide. The message was brief but encouraging. The director wanted to schedule a second interview for the following week, suggesting that Sarah's initial conversation had gone better than she had dared to hope. The position would involve working directly with veterans to connect them with services and resources, drawing on her personal experience while helping others navigate similar challenges. The possibility of meaningful work that aligned with her values and experience provided a much-needed boost to Sarah's spirits. The job would offer both purpose and financial stability, while allowing her to use her military background and personal recovery journey in service of others facing similar struggles. It represented the kind of opportunity she had been hoping for since beginning her transition to civilian life.
As she prepared for bed, Sarah thought about the contrast between the official rhetoric about supporting veterans and the reality of daily interactions with people who questioned her legitimacy and value. The gap between policy statements and personal experiences remained significant, requiring ongoing advocacy and education to bridge effectively.
But Sarah also recognized that change happened gradually through individual interactions and personal relationships, rather than sweeping policy declarations.
Her upcoming job interview represented an opportunity to be part of that change process, working within the system to improve outcomes for other veterans while continuing her own healing and growth.
The next morning brought a text message from her physical therapist reminding Sarah about her appointment later in the day.
The therapy sessions had become an important part of her routine, providing both physical benefits and emotional support from professionals who understood the complexities of recovery from military-related injuries. Sarah's physical therapist, Janet Williams, was a veteran herself, having served as a medic in the Army before pursuing advanced training in rehabilitation medicine. This shared background created an immediate understanding and rapport that Sarah had found invaluable during her recovery process. Janet understood not only the medical aspects of Sarah's condition, but also the psychological and social challenges that accompanied the transition from active duty to civilian life. The therapy facility was located in a medical complex that served a diverse patient population, from professional athletes recovering from sports injuries to elderly patients working to maintain their mobility and independence. Sarah appreciated the diversity of the setting, which helped normalize her own rehabilitation process, and reminded her that recovery and adaptation were universal human experiences rather than uniquely military challenges. During her session with Janet, Sarah mentioned the town hall meeting and her mixed feelings about the experience. Janet listened with the kind of active attention that made Sarah feel heard and understood, offering insights that came from both professional expertise and personal experience as a veteran navigating civilian healthcare systems. The generational divide among veterans is real, Janet explained as she guided Sarah through a series of exercises designed to improve her range of motion. Each generation of veterans had different experiences, different expectations, and different support systems. Sometimes that creates tension, but it can also create opportunities for learning and growth if people are willing to listen to each other. Janet's perspective helped Sarah see the evening's events in a more balanced light. While Frank Morrison's comments had been hurtful and based on incomplete understanding, they also reflected genuine concern about veteran welfare and standards. The challenge was finding ways to honor the experiences and perspectives of all generations while ensuring that current veterans received the support and understanding they needed. The therapy session progressed with its usual combination of physical exercises and informal counseling. Janet had a gift for creating an environment where Sarah felt comfortable discussing both her physical symptoms and the emotional challenges that accompanied her recovery.
The combination of professional expertise and personal understanding made these sessions among the most valuable parts of Sarah's weekly routine.
As the session concluded, Janet mentioned a support group that met monthly at the facility.
The group brought together veterans from different eras and service branches, creating opportunities for mutual support and shared learning. Sarah had been hesitant to join group activities, preferring to handle her challenges independently, but Janet's description of the group's dynamics and benefits sparked her interest. "Might be worth trying," Janet suggested as Sarah prepared to leave. "Sometimes hearing other people's stories helps us understand our own experiences in new ways. And sometimes we discover that what we thought were personal failures or weaknesses are actually common challenges that lots of veterans face." The drive home from therapy took Sarah through a part of town she rarely visited, past strip malls and residential neighborhoods that housed many of the area's working families. She found herself thinking about the diversity of veteran experiences represented in these communities, from recent combat veterans dealing with visible and invisible wounds, to older veterans who had built successful civilian careers after their service. Each veteran's story was unique, shaped by factors ranging from the historical period of their service to their individual circumstances and support systems. But Sarah was beginning to understand that these individual stories were also part of a larger narrative about service, sacrifice, and the ongoing challenge of maintaining meaningful connections between military and civilian communities. Her upcoming job interview represented an opportunity to become part of bridging that gap, using her own experience and hard-earned insights to help other veterans navigate the complex transition from military to civilian life. The work would be challenging and sometimes frustrating, but it would also provide the kind of purpose and meaning that Sarah had been searching for since her medical discharge. As she arrived home, Sarah felt more optimistic about her future than she had in weeks. The combination of potential meaningful work, ongoing physical recovery, and growing understanding of her place in the larger veteran community created a sense of forward momentum that had been missing for too long. The evening news was discussing federal legislation related to veteran benefits, featuring interviews with politicians and advocates who spoke earnestly about their commitment to supporting military families. Sarah listened with interest, but also with the skeptical perspective that came from personal experience with the gap between policy promises and practical implementation. Real change would require more than legislative action or policy statements. It would require ongoing education, relationship building, and the kind of patient work that happened one person at a time, one conversation at a time, one connection at a time. Sarah was ready to be part of that process, contributing her own experiences and insights to the broader effort of creating communities that truly understood and supported all veterans, regardless of the era of their service or the visible nature of their sacrifices. The second interview at Hope Veterans Services took place on a crisp Tuesday morning in downtown's historic district. The organization occupied a converted Victorian house that had been carefully restored to serve as offices while maintaining its original character and charm. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, using the extra time to compose herself and review the notes she had prepared about her qualifications and goals. The receptionist, a friendly woman named Carol, who identified herself as a military spouse, offered Sarah coffee and engaged in light conversation that helped ease the pre-interview tension. Carol's husband had served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Army, and her understanding of military culture was evident in the way she spoke about veteran issues and challenges. This immediate connection to the military community felt like a positive sign to Sarah, suggesting that the organization genuinely prioritized hiring people who understood veteran experiences from personal rather than purely academic perspectives. Director Michael Thompson emerged from his office exactly on time, his professional demeanor balanced by a warmth that immediately put Sarah at ease. He was a Navy veteran himself, having served for 12 years before transitioning to social work and veteran advocacy. His experience bridged both military service and civilian professional development, making him an ideal person to evaluate Sarah's potential for success in the coordinator role. The interview began in Thompson's office, which was decorated with a careful balance of professional credentials and personal mementos from his military service. Sarah noticed photos from his time aboard various ships along with certificates and awards that spoke to his commitment to veteran advocacy work. The environment felt both professional and welcoming, reflecting the organization's mission to serve veterans with dignity and understanding.
Thompson's questions were thoughtful and comprehensive, focusing not only on Sarah's qualifications but also on her understanding of the challenges facing contemporary veterans. He asked about her own transition experiences, her perspective on barriers to accessing services, and her ideas for improving outreach and support systems. Sarah found herself speaking more openly about her personal journey than she had expected, encouraged by Thompson's genuine interest and obvious understanding of the complexities involved in military to civilian transitions. One of the biggest challenges we face, Thompson explained during a pause in the formal questioning, is the diversity of veteran experiences and needs. We serve everyone from World War II veterans in their 90s to recent combat veterans just returning from overseas deployments. Each generation has different expectations, different communication styles, and different comfort levels with various types of support. Sarah nodded, thinking about her recent encounters with older veterans like Frank Morrison. She described her observations about generational differences among veterans, emphasizing her belief that effective service coordination required understanding and respecting these differences, rather than trying to force everyone into the same mold. I've noticed that some veterans are uncomfortable with what they see as too much support or accommodation, Sarah explained. They worry that younger veterans are becoming too dependent on services that they view as unnecessary or excessive. But I've also seen how modern military service creates different types of challenges that weren't as recognized or understood in earlier eras. Thompson listened intently as Sarah continued to share her perspective on bridging generational divides within the veteran community. Her insights reflected both personal experience and careful observation of the dynamics she had witnessed in various settings. The conversation felt more like a professional consultation than a traditional job interview, with both participants contributing ideas and perspectives that enriched their mutual understanding. The second part of the interview took place in the organization's main service area, where Sarah could observe the daily operations and interact with both staff members and veterans who were accessing services. The environment was busy but well organized, with different areas designated for various types of assistance ranging from benefits counseling to employment support to mental health resources. Sarah was introduced to several current staff members, each of whom shared their perspectives on the challenges and rewards of veteran service work. The team included social workers, former military personnel, and civilian advocates who had developed expertise in veteran issues through education and experience. The diversity of backgrounds and approaches represented in the staff seemed to reflect the organization's commitment to meeting veterans where they were rather than imposing a one-size-fits-all model of service delivery. During her tour of the facility, Sarah encountered several veterans who were accessing different services. She was struck by the diversity of ages, backgrounds, and needs represented among the clients. An elderly Korean War veteran was working with a benefits counselor to understand changes in VA healthcare policies. A young Marine who had recently completed his service was meeting with an employment specialist about job search strategies. A middle-aged veteran and his spouse were attending a family counseling session designed to address relationship challenges related to military service and transition stress. Each interaction Sarah observed reinforced her understanding of how complex and individualized veteran needs could be. The staff members she watched demonstrated remarkable skill in adapting their approaches to meet each person where they were, whether that meant using formal military terminology with veterans who preferred that style of communication or adopting more casual civilian-friendly language with those who were actively trying to distance themselves from military identity. One interaction particularly caught Sarah's attention. A woman about her own age was meeting with a coordinator about housing assistance, describing challenges that sounded remarkably familiar. She had been medically discharged from the Air Force and was struggling to find affordable housing that met her accessibility needs while remaining close to medical services and employment opportunities. The coordinator listened with patience and expertise, offering both practical resources and emotional support that acknowledged the complexity of the situation. Sarah found herself imagining how she might handle similar situations, drawing on her own experiences while maintaining the professional boundaries necessary for effective service delivery. The combination of personal understanding and professional objectivity seemed crucial for success in this type of work, requiring skills that went beyond either military experience or civilian social services training alone. As the tour concluded, Thompson invited Sarah to lunch at a nearby restaurant where they could continue their conversation in a more relaxed setting. The restaurant was popular with local professionals, and Sarah noticed several tables occupied by people who appeared to be conducting business meetings or job interviews. The atmosphere was conducive to serious conversation while remaining comfortable and informal. Over lunch, Thompson shared more details about the organization's history, mission, and future goals. Hope Veteran Services had been founded 5 years earlier by a group of veterans and community advocates who recognized gaps in existing support systems. The organization had grown steadily,
expanding both its services and its geographic reach as funding and community support increased. "We're at a critical juncture," Thompson explained as he described the organization's strategic planning process. "We have the opportunity to significantly expand our impact, but we need the right people in key positions. The coordinator role you're interviewing for would be central to our ability to serve more veterans while maintaining the quality and personalization that sets us apart from larger, more bureaucratic organizations." Sarah felt a surge of excitement as Thompson described the potential for growth and impact. The position would involve not only direct service coordination but also program development, community outreach, and staff training responsibilities. It represented exactly the kind of meaningful work she had been hoping to find, combining her military experience with opportunities for professional development and genuine service to others facing similar challenges. The conversation turned to Sarah's long-term career goals and her interest in potentially pursuing additional education or training related to veteran services. Thompson mentioned partnerships the organization had developed with local universities and professional development programs that could support staff members interested in advancing their expertise and qualifications. "We believe in investing in our people," Thompson said, his sincerity evident in both his tone and his examples of staff members who had been supported in their professional growth. Military veterans bring unique perspectives and skills to this work, but they also benefit from training and support that helps them translate those qualities into effective civilian service delivery. As lunch concluded and they prepared to return to the office, Sarah felt increasingly confident that this position represented an ideal fit for her skills, interests, and career goals. The organization's mission aligned with her values, the work environment seemed supportive and professional, and the opportunities for growth and impact were exactly what she had been seeking. The final portion of the interview involved meeting with 2 other staff members who would be her primary colleagues if she were hired. Both were veterans themselves, one from the Army and one from the Marines, and their perspectives on the work environment and organizational culture provided additional insights into what her daily experience might look like. The Army veteran Lisa Chang had been with the organization for 3 years and spoke enthusiastically about the supportive team dynamics and the meaningful impact of the work. She described the challenges honestly, acknowledging that veteran services could be emotionally demanding and sometimes frustrating when systemic barriers prevented optimal outcomes for clients. But she also emphasized the rewards of helping other veterans navigate successfully through difficult transitions and connect with resources that genuinely improved their lives. The Marine veteran Robert Hayes had joined the organization more recently after leaving a civilian career that had never felt quite right after his military service. He spoke about finding renewed purpose and direction through his work at Hope Veterans Services, describing how helping other veterans had also contributed to his own continued healing and growth. "There's something powerful about working with people who understand what you've been through," Hayes explained. "Not that every veteran's experience is the same, but there's a shared foundation that makes communication and trust building happen more quickly and naturally." Sarah found both colleagues impressive and genuine, and their descriptions of the work environment reinforced her positive impressions from her interactions with Thompson and her observations throughout the day. The organization seemed to have successfully created a culture that honored military values while adapting them effectively to civilian service delivery. As the interview process concluded, Thompson walked Sarah to her car, taking advantage of the private moment to share some final thoughts about the position and her candidacy. His feedback was encouraging, suggesting that she had made a strong impression and that her combination of personal experience and professional potential made her an attractive candidate. "We'll be making our final decision by the end of the week," Thompson said as they reached Sarah's car. "Regardless of the outcome, I want you to know that you've impressed everyone you've met today. Your insights and perspective would be valuable additions to any organization doing this kind of work." The drive home gave Sarah time to process the day's experiences and reflect on how the interview had gone. She felt optimistic about her chances but also prepared for the possibility that the position might go to another candidate. The interview process had been valuable in its own right, helping her clarify her career goals and confirming her interest in veteran service work. More importantly, the day had reinforced her sense that meaningful work was possible after her military service, that her experiences and challenges could be transformed into assets for helping others facing similar situations. The prospect of returning to purposeful work that aligned with her values felt like a crucial step in her ongoing recovery and reintegration process. That evening, Sarah called her sister Maria to share news about the interview. Maria had been a consistent source of support throughout Sarah's transition, offering both practical help and emotional encouragement when Sarah's confidence wavered. Their conversation that night was filled with optimism and excitement about the possibilities that might lie ahead. "You sounded more like yourself today than you have in months," Maria observed during their call.
"More confident and focused," Like you used to be when you were talking about your Navy work.
The observation resonated with Sarah, who realized that the interview had indeed reconnected her with aspects of her identity and capabilities that had been overshadowed by the challenges of medical discharge and civilian adjustment.
Talking about her experiences and insights in a professional context had reminded her that her military service had provided valuable skills and perspectives that could benefit others, not just difficult memories and physical limitations to overcome.
As she prepared for bed, Sarah felt more hopeful about her future than she had in many months. Whether or not she received this particular job offer, the interview process had demonstrated that opportunities existed for meaningful work that would honor her military experience while providing new challenges and growth opportunities.
The week ahead would be filled with waiting and uncertainty, but Sarah felt prepared to handle whatever outcome emerged. She had presented herself authentically and professionally, demonstrating both her qualifications and her commitment to serving other veterans. The rest was beyond her control, and she was learning to find peace in that reality while remaining open to whatever possibilities might emerge. Her phone showed a text message from Janet, her physical therapist, asking how the interview had gone and reminding Sarah about their next appointment. The continued support from people like Janet, her family, and new connections like Thompson reinforced Sarah's growing understanding that recovery and growth were collaborative processes that benefited from community and professional relationships. The uniform hanging in her closet no longer felt like a symbol of loss and limitation, but rather a reminder of service that continued in new forms. Whatever direction her career might take, Sarah was committed to honoring the values and experiences that had shaped her military service while embracing the opportunities and challenges that civilian life could offer. Friday morning arrived with the phone call Sarah had been both anticipating and dreading. Michael Thompson's voice was warm and professional as he delivered the news that would change everything. She had been selected for the coordinator position at Hope Veterans Services. The relief and excitement that flooded through her was so intense that she had to sit down mid-conversation, her hand trembling slightly as she held the phone. "We were impressed not only with your qualifications but with your genuine understanding of the challenges our clients face," Thompson explained. "Your perspective on bridging generational divides among veterans and your insights about the complexity of modern military service convinced us that you'd be an excellent addition to our team." Sarah accepted the position immediately, though Thompson encouraged her to take time to review the formal offer letter that would arrive by email later that day. They discussed start dates, training schedules, and the initial projects she would be assigned. The conversation felt surreal to Sarah, who had struggled for months to envision a meaningful career path after her medical discharge. Now suddenly that path was not only visible but actively unfolding before her. The first few weeks at Hope Veterans Services exceeded even Sarah's optimistic expectations. The orientation process was comprehensive but not overwhelming, designed to help new staff members understand both the organization's mission and the practical skills needed for effective service delivery. Sarah found herself working closely with Lisa Chang and Robert Hayes, learning their approaches to client interaction while developing her own style and methodology. Her first independent case involved helping a recently discharged Army veteran named Marcus Williams navigate the complex process of applying for disability benefits. Marcus had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and was dealing with both physical injuries from an IED explosion and the psychological aftermath of combat experiences. His situation was complicated by a less than honorable discharge that had resulted from conflicts with his command structure during his final months of service. Sarah recognized elements of her own experience in Marcus's story, particularly the challenge of reconciling military identity with civilian realities. But she also saw important differences that required careful attention and individualized approaches. Marcus's injuries were more visible than hers, involving obvious physical limitations that made his veteran status immediately apparent to casual observers. But his discharge status created barriers to accessing services that Sarah had never encountered. Working with Marcus taught Sarah valuable lessons about the diversity of veteran experiences and the importance of understanding each person's unique circumstances, rather than making assumptions based on her own background. The case required extensive research, coordination with multiple agencies, and careful advocacy to ensure that Marcus received the support he deserved despite the complications created by his discharge status. The successful resolution of Marcus's case, which took nearly 2 months of persistent effort, provided Sarah with profound satisfaction and confirmed her decision to pursue veteran service work. When Marcus finally received approval for his benefits and was able to access both medical care and vocational rehabilitation services, his gratitude was overwhelming. But more importantly to Sarah, she could see genuine hope returning to his eyes as he began to envision a stable future for himself and his young family. As Sarah's caseload expanded and her confidence grew, she began to take on additional responsibilities within the organization. Thompson assigned her to represent Hope Veteran Services at various community events, where she could share information about available resources and build relationships with other organizations serving veteran populations. One of these events proved to be a turning point in ways Sarah never could have anticipated. The annual Veterans Day ceremony at Riverside Park was a major community gathering that brought together veterans from all eras, their families and local officials for speeches, recognition ceremonies, and fellowship. Sarah attended in her naval uniform, both as a representative of her organization and as a participant in the formal color guard presentation.
The ceremony began with traditional elements, the posting of colors, the national anthem, and remarks from local officials acknowledging the service and sacrifice of community veterans. The crowd was diverse, including elderly World War II and Korean War veterans, Vietnam-era veterans, and younger veterans from the more recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Family members and community supporters filled out the gathering, creating an atmosphere of respect and appreciation. Sarah was scheduled to speak briefly about Hope Veterans Services and the resources available to local veterans. Her presentation was designed to be informational rather than personal, focusing on services and contact information that might benefit audience members or their families. She had practiced the remarks extensively, wanting to strike the right balance between professionalism and accessibility. But as she stood at the podium looking out at the assembled crowd, Sarah noticed Frank Morrison in the front row. The VFW commander who had questioned her legitimacy at the town hall meeting was sitting with several other older veterans, his expression skeptical as he waited for her presentation. Their previous encounter flashed through Sarah's mind, along with all the doubts and judgments she had encountered from people who questioned her right to wear the uniform or claim veteran status. Sarah began her prepared remarks, but as she spoke about the diversity of veteran experiences and the importance of understanding that service-related challenges could take many different forms, she found herself departing from her script. Instead of simply listing available services, she began to speak more personally about the realities of modern military service and the complexities of transitioning to civilian life. With injuries that weren't always visible or easily understood.
Veterans are not a uniform group, Sarah said, her voice gaining strength as she continued. We represent different generations, different conflicts, and different types of service. Some of us carry visible wounds, while others struggle with injuries that can't be seen from the outside. Some of us served in combat zones, while others supported military operations in different but equally important ways. What unites us is our willingness to serve something larger than ourselves, and our shared commitment to the values and principles that make our military strong. The audience was listening intently now, and Sarah could see that her words were resonating with people throughout the crowd. Veterans were nodding in agreement, family members were leaning forward to hear more clearly, and even the local officials seemed more engaged than during previous presentations. The challenges we face in civilian life are as diverse as our service experiences, Sarah continued.
Some veterans struggle with physical injuries that require ongoing medical care and accommodation. Others deal with psychological trauma that affects their ability to work, maintain relationships, or find meaning and purpose outside of military structure.
Still others face practical challenges like translating military skills into civilian qualifications, navigating complex benefit systems, or building new support networks in communities that may not fully understand their experiences. As Sarah spoke, she noticed movement near the back of the crowd.
A group of men in military uniforms had arrived, their bearing and insignia suggesting they were active-duty Navy SEALs from the nearby naval base. Their presence added an unexpected element to the gathering, and Sarah found herself wondering what had brought them to a community Veterans Day ceremony.
The SEAL team members positioned themselves quietly at the edge of the crowd, their professional demeanor suggesting they were attending in an official capacity rather than as casual participants. Sarah continued her presentation, though she remained aware of their presence and curious about their purpose at the event.
At Hope Veteran Services, Sarah continued, returning to her prepared remarks. We believe that every veteran deserves respect, support, and access to resources that can help them build successful civilian lives. We don't judge the nature of someone's service or the type of challenges they face.
Our job is to meet people where they are and help them access whatever support they need to thrive. As Sarah concluded her presentation and prepared to return to her seat, she noticed that Frank Morrison was no longer looking skeptical. His expression had shifted during her remarks, suggesting that something in her words had resonated with him despite their previous disagreement.
The change was subtle but noticeable, and it gave Sarah hope that minds could change when people were willing to listen and consider perspectives different from their own.
The ceremony continued with additional speakers and the traditional wreath-laying ritual. During the informal fellowship period that followed,
Sarah found herself engaged in numerous conversations with veterans and family members who had been moved by her presentation. Several people shared their own experiences with service-related challenges, while others asked for information about specific resources available through her organization. But the most significant interaction occurred when Frank Morrison approached her during the reception. His demeanor was markedly different from their previous encounter, suggesting that her presentation had indeed prompted him to reconsider some of his assumptions about younger veterans and their experiences.
"I owe you an apology," Morrison said without preamble, his directness reflecting his military background. "I made assumptions about your situation that weren't fair or accurate. Your presentation today helped me understand that military service and military injuries have changed in ways that I hadn't fully appreciated." Sarah was surprised by Morrison's acknowledgement, having expected that their philosophical differences were too fundamental to bridge. His willingness to admit error and reconsider his position demonstrated the kind of integrity and openness to growth that she respected, regardless of their generational differences.
"I appreciate that," Sarah replied, choosing her words carefully.
I understand that each generation of veterans had different experiences and expectations. My goal isn't to diminish the sacrifices made by earlier generations, but to help people understand that today's veterans face some unique challenges that require evolved approaches to support and care.
Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "I've been talking to some of the younger veterans in our VFW post, really listening to their stories for the first time instead of just comparing them to my own experiences."
You're right that things have changed, and maybe some of us older veterans need to be more open to understanding those changes. Their conversation continued for several more minutes, touching on topics ranging from evolving military technology and tactics to changes in how society understands and addresses military-related trauma.
Sarah found Morrison to be thoughtful and genuinely interested in learning, quite different from the judgmental figure she had encountered at the town hall meeting. As their conversation was winding down, Sarah became aware that the group of Navy SEALs was approaching. The team leader, a senior chief petty officer whose uniform displayed an impressive array of ribbons and insignia, stepped forward with a purposeful but respectful demeanor. "Excuse me, miss," the senior chief said, addressing Sarah directly.
I'm Senior Chief Rodriguez from SEAL Team 5. We couldn't help but overhear your presentation, and we wanted to introduce ourselves.
Sarah acknowledged the introduction, curious about what had brought the SEAL team to the ceremony and why they were interested in speaking with her. Senior Chief Rodriguez continued with an explanation that would change everything Sarah thought she knew about respect, recognition, and the true meaning of military brotherhood.
We've been following your work with Hope Veteran Services, Rodriguez explained. One of our former team members, Marcus Williams, has been telling us about how you helped him navigate the benefits system after his discharge.
He credits you with turning his life around when he was ready to give up entirely. Sarah was stunned to realize that Marcus, the veteran she had helped with his disability claim, had connections to this elite military unit.
She had known about his Army service but hadn't realized the full extent of his military background or the relationships he had maintained with other special operations personnel.
Marcus served with distinction during multiple deployments, Rodriguez continued. His discharge circumstances were complicated by factors that had nothing to do with his performance or valor in combat.
When he was struggling to access the support he deserved, you stepped up and fought for him when the system was working against him. The senior chief's words were drawing attention from other ceremony participants, including Frank Morrison, who was listening with obvious interest to this unexpected development. Sarah felt increasingly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking, uncertain about where it might lead or what the SEALs wanted from her. Marcus told us about your own military service and your medical discharge, Rodriguez said, his voice carrying a tone of respect that seemed to command attention from everyone within hearing range. He also told us about some of the attitudes and assumptions you've encountered since your discharge, including people who questioned your legitimacy or suggested that your injuries weren't serious enough to warrant disability status. Sarah's discomfort was growing, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly why.
The SEALs were being respectful and professional, but their attention was creating exactly the kind of public focus that she had always tried to avoid. She preferred to do her work quietly, without fanfare or dramatic gestures that might overshadow the veterans she was trying to serve.
"We wanted to set the record straight about a few things," Rodriguez continued, his voice now carrying clearly across the reception area as conversations around them grew quieter. "First, we want everyone here to understand that military service takes many forms, and that valor and sacrifice aren't limited to combat roles or visible injuries.
Second, we want to make sure that people understand exactly what kind of service member and person they're dealing with when they encounter Petty Officer Martinez." The formal use of Sarah's rank and surname caught her off guard,
suggesting that the SEALs had conducted research into her military background that went beyond Marcus's informal descriptions. She found herself wondering what they had discovered and why they felt compelled to share that information in such a public setting. Rodriguez reached into his uniform pocket and withdrew a folded document that Sarah didn't recognize. As he began to unfold it, she realized that the entire reception area had grown quiet, with dozens of people now focused on whatever revelation was about to unfold. "What we have here," Rodriguez announced, his voice now projecting with the authority of someone accustomed to command situations, "is a copy of Petty Officer Martinez's commendation record from her final deployment. Some of you may be interested to learn exactly what kind of service led to her medical discharge." Sarah felt her heart rate spike as she realized that her private military record was about to become very public information. She had never shared the details of her final deployment with anyone outside of medical personnel, preferring to focus on her current work rather than relitigating past events. But the SEALs apparently had different ideas about what information should be made public. Senior Chief Rodriguez's voice carried across the now silent gathering as he began to read from the official document in his hands. Sarah felt every eye in the crowd focused on her, and her instinct was to flee from this unwanted attention.
But her military training held her in place, maintaining composure, even as her private service record was about to become public knowledge.
"Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Combat Distinguishing Device," Rodriguez began, his voice steady and clear. "For exceptionally meritorious conduct and the performance of outstanding service while serving as a communications specialist aboard USS Hampton during combat operations in support of Operation Inherent Resolve." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, remembering the night that had changed everything. She had never spoken publicly about those events, preferring to let her medical discharge speak for itself, rather than seeking recognition or sympathy for actions she had simply considered her duty. Petty Officer Martinez distinguished herself during a critical communications failure that occurred while the ship was providing support for Special Operations Forces conducting a high-priority mission in hostile territory. Rodriguez continued. "When the primary communications array was damaged by enemy fire, Petty Officer Martinez voluntarily entered the damaged compartment despite significant risk to her personal safety." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Sarah could see Frank Morrison's expression had shifted to one of intense attention and growing understanding. Other veterans in the crowd were leaning forward, recognizing the gravity of what they were hearing.
Working under extreme conditions and in imminent danger, Petty Officer Martinez successfully restored communications capability, enabling the ship to coordinate the safe extraction of endangered personnel. Her actions directly contributed to saving the lives of 12 Special Operations team members who would otherwise have been left without support in enemy territory. Rodriguez paused, letting the weight of those words settle across the gathering. Sarah felt exposed and vulnerable, her private heroism suddenly thrust into public view in ways that made her deeply uncomfortable. She had joined the Navy to serve her country, not to become the subject of public recognition or ceremony. The equipment failure that Petty Officer Martinez worked to repair was caused by an improvised explosive device that had been attached to the ship's hull during a previous port call, Rodriguez continued. The explosion occurred while she was working to restore the communications array, causing severe internal injuries that required immediate evacuation and months of medical treatment. The senior chief folded the commendation and looked directly at Sarah before addressing the crowd again.
Petty Officer Martinez could have waited for damage control teams to secure the area before attempting repairs. She could have followed standard procedure and accepted that the communications capability was lost. Instead, she chose to risk her life to ensure that her fellow service members had the support they needed to survive their mission. Sarah felt tears threatening to form, not from pride or gratitude, but from the overwhelming emotion of having her most private military experience exposed to public scrutiny. The night of the explosion had haunted her dreams for months, not because of the physical pain she had endured, but because of the responsibility she had felt for her shipmates and the special operations personnel, depending on their support. Rodriguez wasn't finished. The internal injuries that Petty Officer Martinez sustained during that explosion continued to affect her daily life. Her medical discharge wasn't the result of seeking an easy way out of military service, as some people have suggested. It was the inevitable consequence of choosing duty and honor over personal safety when lives were at stake. Frank Morrison stepped forward from the crowd, his weathered face reflecting a mixture of shame and respect. The VFW commander who had questioned Sarah's legitimacy just weeks earlier now found himself confronting the reality of her actual service record and the sacrifices she had made. "I was wrong," Morrison announced, his voice carrying clearly across the gathering. "I made assumptions based on ignorance and prejudice, and I owe this young woman a profound apology. More than that, I owe her the respect and recognition that her service deserves." Other veterans in the crowd began to nod in agreement, their own expressions reflecting various degrees of shame, respect, and newfound understanding. Sarah realized that her story was becoming a teaching moment, though not one she had ever wanted or sought for herself. But Senior Chief Rodriguez had one more revelation that would fundamentally change how everyone present understood the events they were witnessing. He reached into his pocket again and withdrew another document, this one bearing the official seal of Naval Special Warfare Command.
"There's something else that Petty Officer Martinez doesn't know," Rodriguez said, his voice taking on an even more serious tone. "The special operations personnel whose lives she saved that night included members of my team who were conducting a classified mission that couldn't be publicly acknowledged at the time."
Sarah felt the world shift around her as Rodriguez's words sank in.
The abstract knowledge that her actions had saved lives suddenly became personal and immediate. These weren't unnamed special operations personnel from her commendation paperwork. They were real people standing before her, whose families and futures had been preserved by her split-second decision to enter a damaged compartment despite the obvious danger.
"My teammates and I have been trying to locate Petty Officer Martinez since we learned about her medical discharge and the challenges she's been facing during her transition to civilian life," Rodriguez continued. "When we heard about her work with Hope Veteran Services and the difference she's been making in other veterans' lives, we knew we had to find a way to properly acknowledge what she did for us." Rodriguez signaled to his teammates, who stepped forward carrying a framed citation that Sarah had never seen before. The document bore the signatures of senior Naval Special Warfare Command officers and contained language that made her realize the true scope and significance of the mission she had supported that night. "On behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command and the 12 Special Operations personnel whose lives were saved by your actions, we want to present you with this citation of appreciation and our personal commitment to ensuring that your service and sacrifice are never forgotten or diminished by anyone who lacks the courage or understanding to recognize true heroism when they see it." The presentation of the citation was accompanied by something unprecedented in Sarah's experience: a crowd of veterans, from multiple generations and conflicts.
The sound started slowly with just a few people clapping, but it quickly grew into sustained recognition that seemed to acknowledge not just Sarah's specific heroism but the broader principles of service, sacrifice, and brotherhood that connected all of them despite their different experiences and backgrounds. Frank Morrison was among the first to approach Sarah after the formal presentation concluded. His handshake was firm and his eye contact direct as he struggled to find words adequate for the situation. "I don't know how to apologize for what I said at the town hall meeting," Morrison said, his voice rough with emotion. "I questioned your right to wear that uniform, and now I find out that you earned it in ways that put my own service to shame. I hope you can forgive an old fool who thought he understood more than he actually did." Sarah accepted Morrison's apology with grace, recognizing that his willingness to acknowledge error and change his perspective reflected the same military values of integrity and honor that had motivated her own service. The gap between their generations and experiences suddenly seemed less important than their shared commitment to supporting fellow veterans and learning from each other's perspectives. "There's nothing to forgive," Sarah replied. "We all make assumptions based on our own experiences. What matters is that we're willing to learn and grow when we encounter new information. That's how we build stronger veteran communities that support everyone who has served." The reception continued for another hour, but the dynamic had fundamentally changed. Veterans who'd previously viewed each other with suspicion or incomprehension now engaged in genuine conversations about their different experiences and shared challenges. Sarah found herself at the center of numerous discussions, but the focus had shifted from her personal story to broader questions about how veteran communities could better support all their members regardless of generation, conflict, or type of service. The Navy SEALs remained for the entire reception, engaging with veterans from other eras and service branches in conversations that bridged generational and cultural divides. Their presence and obvious respect for Sarah helped validate her status in ways that no amount of explanation or argument could have accomplished. As the formal ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Michael Thompson approached Sarah with an expression of pride and amazement. As her supervisor at Hope Veteran Services, he had known about her military background but hadn't been aware of the specific details that had just been revealed. "I think we need to have a conversation about expanding your role with our organization," Thompson said with a smile. "After what just happened here, I have a feeling that a lot more people are going to want to work with Hope Veteran Services, and specifically with you." The drive home that evening gave Sarah time to process the extraordinary events of the day. The public recognition of her military service felt surreal, particularly after months of dealing with questions and doubts about her legitimacy as a veteran. But more important than the personal validation was the broader impact she had witnessed on the veteran community gathered at the ceremony. Frank Morrison's willingness to acknowledge his error and publicly apologize demonstrated that minds could change when people were confronted with new information and different perspectives. The conversations she had observed between veterans from different eras suggested that mutual understanding and support were possible when people approached each other with openness rather than predetermined judgments. The SEALs' intervention had been dramatic and unexpected, but Sarah recognized that their primary motivation had been to correct misunderstandings and ensure that her contributions were properly acknowledged. Their actions reflected the military principle that service members look out for each other, particularly when someone's contributions have been overlooked or minimized. Over the following weeks, the effects of the Veterans Day ceremony continued to ripple through the local veteran community. Hope Veterans Services experienced a significant increase in both client referrals and volunteer applications, with many people citing Sarah's story as inspiration for their involvement. The organization's visibility and credibility within the community reached new levels, enabling expanded programming and outreach efforts. Sarah's own role evolved to include more public speaking and community education responsibilities. She found herself addressing groups ranging from high school students learning about military service to corporate executives interested in hiring veterans. Each presentation provided an opportunity to educate civilians about the diversity of veteran experiences and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances when evaluating someone's service or sacrifice. The relationship with Frank Morrison and other older veterans developed into genuine mentorship and mutual support. Morrison invited Sarah to join the VFW post as a member, where her perspectives and insights helped the organization better understand and serve younger veterans facing contemporary challenges. The generational bridge that had seemed so difficult to build suddenly became a source of strength and wisdom that benefited veterans across all age groups. Marcus Williams, the Army veteran whose case had first connected Sarah to the Navy SEALs, became a close friend and colleague. His successful navigation of the benefit system, with Sarah's help, had enabled him to pursue vocational training and secure stable employment that supported his growing family. His gratitude and ongoing friendship reminded Sarah daily of why her work with Hope Veterans Services was so meaningful and important. The Navy SEALs maintained contact with Sarah, occasionally visiting the organization to volunteer their time and expertise for various veteran support activities. Their continued presence in her professional life served as a constant reminder that service connections extended far beyond active duty, creating lasting bonds of mutual support and respect. 6 months after the Veterans Day ceremony, Sarah received notification that she had been selected to receive a national award for excellence in veteran services. The recognition came from a coalition of veteran organizations that had learned about her work and its impact on both individual veterans and the broader community's understanding of veteran issues. At the national awards ceremony, Sarah was introduced by Senior Chief Rodriguez, who had traveled across the country to participate in the event. His presentation of her accomplishments focused not just on her military heroism but on her ongoing commitment to serving fellow veterans through her civilian career. Petty Officer Martinez demonstrates that military service doesn't end with discharge, Rodriguez told the audience of veteran advocates and service providers. True military values, like courage, integrity, and commitment to others, continue to guide her daily work, helping other veterans build successful civilian lives. She embodies the principle that we leave no one behind, whether on the battlefield or in the challenges of post-military life. Sarah's acceptance speech focused on the importance of understanding and respecting the diversity of veteran experiences, while maintaining unity around shared values and mutual support. She emphasized that every veteran's story was important, regardless of their era of service, type of military occupation, or visible evidence of their sacrifices. We are strongest when we recognize that military service takes many forms and that heroism isn't always obvious to casual observers, Sarah said, looking out at an audience that included veterans from World War II through the most recent conflicts. Our responsibility to each other doesn't end when we take off the uniform. It continues through every act of support, understanding, and advocacy that helps a fellow veteran thrive in civilian life. The standing ovation that followed Sarah's remarks reflected more than appreciation for her individual achievements. It represented recognition of the broader principles she had come to embody, that judgment should be replaced with understanding, that assumptions should give way to genuine listening, and that the veteran community grows stronger when it embraces the full spectrum of service and sacrifice represented by its members. As Sarah flew home from the awards ceremony, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a hospital bed to national recognition for her veteran service work. The path had been marked by physical pain, emotional challenges, and moments of doubt about her worth and legitimacy. But it had also been illuminated by the support of family, the guidance of mentors like Janet Williams, and the profound satisfaction of meaningful work that honored her military values while serving fellow veterans. The uniform hanging in her closet no longer represented loss or limitation. It had become a symbol of ongoing service, a reminder that the principles learned in military life could be applied to any endeavor that served others and contributed to the greater good. Sarah had discovered that heroism was.
They judged the wounded woman in uniform. Moments later, the SEALs regretted everything.